TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
I'm also an action researcher. That's my main mode of researching. I'm setting up research projects where I'm in the change, supporting the organization in the change process. And then we collectively and collaboratively try to learn what seemed to work.
Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Well, I hope all is well with you today. It is a rainy day here in North Carolina, and we are just waiting for Hurricane Idalia to pass by. For those listeners in the path of this storm, please stay safe. As a reminder, this episode is brought to you by our sponsors, Ignite Management Services and Liberty Strength. These sponsors help me bring these shows to you each and every week, so I encourage you to click on their links below and check them out. Also, I want to encourage you to join us on our growing YouTube channel. Search for Deep Leadership on YouTube for videos of all my interviews and exclusive content. Well, that is it. Today we're going to be talking about leading change, and my guest is Johanna Pregmark. Johanna is a researcher, consultant, speaker, and expert in change management. She is a prolific author of academic research in the science of leading teams in change initiatives. Now, I love this conversation, and I know you'll find it interesting as well. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Johanna Pregmark. Johanna is a researcher, consultant, and speaker. She has a PhD in innovation, transformation, and change. But more importantly, she's an expert in change management and organizational transformation. Now, I first learned of her work when I was researching best practices in change management as part of my doctoral program. But I'm honored now to have her on the show to talk about what it takes as a leader to lead change in an organization. So, Johanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
It's an honor to have you on the show. It's an honor to meet you. I love your work. I have referenced your work many times, and so it's kind of an honor to meet you and to have you here in person. But let's talk a little bit about yourself. Now, how did you get into the field of change management, organizational transformation? How did you get into the world of academia to where you're writing these major research papers? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Oh, thank you. I will. And thank you for that introduction. I wish I could bring you with me all the time so you can introduce me. It would sort of boost my confidence. This is great. So thank you for that. Well, actually, I started off as a practitioner working in practice and only joined academia a little bit later in my career. I started working as a management consultant right after university. And I thought it was going to be quite easy to be working with change. I thought if I just applied my fancy models that I learned and brought all the data and calculated in the right way, I thought I was, going to nail it. And I think I learned the hard way that wasn't really the thing. The thing was the people, and the thing was to really find the strength and the creativity and the power of the people that was going to change in the organization. And I thought that as a consultant and later on a leader, I never got the chance to dig really deep into why that is so hard. I constantly read that from various reports that about 70% of all research initiatives or change initiatives fail.
Yes.
But I never got to sort of figure out why and what can we do about that. That's really tragic. We can't spend so much time and money and people's energy on so much failure and frustration. We need to do it better. So after 15 years of practice, I decided to try to go into academia, and first of all to learn so much more, and maybe bring in some practice perspective into academia, which kind of is needed sometimes.
Yes,
I think, and also then to co-develop maybe new thinking to make things better, basically. And that was like after 15 years of practice. So I did my PhD around change, and especially around change in this kind of contemporary context where things need to go faster, where we need more of innovation, more of creativity, that kind of world. And wrote my thesis around that. And after that, I only realized that it's so much more to learn. I thought maybe I would be sort of done. I'm not at all. So that's also a good thing with academia. I can recommend it, because when you're sort of one of my best friends and someone I admire a lot and that I work with in academia, he's called Professor Mike Beer at Harvard. He's 87 and he's amazing. He's still super active. We're writing papers together now, and he's super curious and want to learn more. And I thought that could be me, continuously learn. So I like it.
That's fantastic. We talked about earlier in the show, you were a practitioner, and then you went into, academia, you got your PhD, you dove deep into the waters of academia, which is amazing. We talked about my story. I'm 56 and I've dove into those waters now. And I think for me, at least, it was like a vast ocean of knowledge that existed that I'm mad, because here I am, 56 years old, been leading people for over 30 years. And here's all this research, here's all this data, here's all this information that I never was exposed to as a practitioner. So I think that you said something early on that I thought was interesting, was you want to bring in a practitioner's approach to academia, because I think that's necessary. And I also think it's necessary that academia gets more, viewership with practitioners. I don't think we do it enough. Occasionally there'll be a good researcher, they'll get a book that goes into mainstream. And so that kind of takes off. Maybe Angela Duckworth with Grit, that's maybe an example of a well-researched idea that turned into a popular book. And I think those are great when they bridge, but there's so much, it's hard to describe if you've never spent time doing academic research, but there's just a deep well of knowledge that exists out there that just never gets the light of day, I don't think. So
I couldn't agree more. And I think that was actually, I'm still working, as an advisor and speaker, and think that it's super important. Not only I think it's fun, but I also think it's when I'm out there, I'm getting the real stories. I'm getting sort of the temperature. What is it that they are facing? I think that is super important to continuously have that connection. But also, as you say, the other way around. And that was actually something that I think surprised me the most when I started doing research. One thing was I went to my first conference, and I remember I went into a session and someone asked all the participants, so do you identify as a practitioner or an academic? And I'm like, I identify with the cause. I identify with, I want to find better way of changing and transforming organizations. And especially now, when I think it's more important than ever that we as leaders step up and lead the change, when we have all these, the climate crisis, we have all these things that we need to work towards as leaders. So I don't really particularly identify as one or the other. I want to identify as we as a collective trying to make things better. And that was something that surprised me a bit, that kind of divide was so strong. But now I realize it's a divide from both sides, right? So if people like you and me can try to bridge that divide, I think it's great, actually.
Yeah, I think it is as well. And I hope through my studies is that I try to bring at least a view of this ocean to the general public or to leaders that are trying to be better. You just got promoted to, maybe you have 12 people in your department. You're now the manager. I want to bring this deep research and bring it to that person to help them be a more successful boss, be a more successful leader. And I think that, I think having both is really a unique skill set, being both academically strong, but also having that practical experience. I think you can relate to people more. And I think that's probably why I like your writing so much. Maybe that's why I identified with it so much when I read some of your work. But one of the things I was asking you're a very prolific researcher. Tell us some of the research you've conducted around leading change, or even other topics.
Well, I would say that everything I do departs from something that has to do with change and leading change. Not only the leadership per se, but also how to create as a leader, create an organizational system that is capable of changing, basically. And I think all my research departs from the idea that we now live in a world where the older models are not enough. And many of the older models that we use, both I think in practice and to some extent in research, they have the basic idea that the best case is a stable organization. So change is what happened between two stable states. And that's just the messiness in between. And then we're stable again. And I think that in what we see now is a world where we need to prepare our organizations. And as leaders, then we need to prepare our organizations for being in change and develop change capabilities that are more continuous and potentially also more emergent. And I think all my research departs from the idea that has implications for what kind of things you need to think about. For example, I'm really interested in the idea of leading an organization that is more entrepreneurial. We talk a lot in organizations about that we need innovation and entrepreneurship, but most of the models and the thinking is to create an efficient organization. And that is not necessarily good for the entrepreneurial work. So corporate entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship is something that I'm really interested in. I've done a lot of work on. We have a master program where I work at Chalmers in Gothenburg. We have a master program where we had around 20 students every year, and we throw them out there last year in large organizations like, I don't know, Volvo or something like that, to drive and lead an entrepreneurial project in the messiness of the processes and the state gate models and all of that. And I think that is a very interesting concept to see what happens. So we've done a lot of research around that. I'm also an action researcher. That's my main mode of researching. Okay. And that means that I'm not super interested in just noting what had already happened. I'm setting up research projects where I'm in the change. So I'm supporting the organization together with my colleagues and supporting the organization in the change process. And then we collectively and collaboratively try to learn what seemed to work. Doing all these, I guess this is something you are very, very familiar with after action reviews and continuously doing that as data collection. So we've done a lot of those kinds of projects in transforming industries, like in the media industry or now in medtech. It's super hot to so many changes when it comes to the digital world of medtech, and so it's a lot of different sort of areas, but it all departs from the same question: how can we change better, faster, and adapt organizations in a better way? And I think that is, as I said before, I think is going to be even more important. We also have a research center that's called Center for Higher Ambition, where we try to collect organizations or leaders, CEOs and other leaders who has the ambition to not only create economic value, but also create social value of some sort, and help them to develop their organization in order to transform in a good way. So I think you can have different facets of leading change, but it's a lot about how to be able to adapt in faster and more in more creative and innovative ways, because I think it's needed in this fast-moving world.
It's interesting you brought it up, because I've actually started looking at the idea of, instead of preparing a team for change, right? How do we create a team that can change a lot? That change becomes the normal way we do business, right? So and that's exactly what we're talking about, is this idea of continuous change, where things are constantly changing. Instead of so the old way we looked at change was, it's a project. We're going to launch the new ERP system, and here's how we do it. And that's when, we were talking earlier in the show, that's when the John Kotter, 8-step approach, that's where we're going to take that. But, and really, and that traces its roots back to like this Kurt Lewin, which is you unfreeze, you change, and you refreeze, right? But the fact of the matter is that we're doing this on a regular basis. Think about the past 5 years. What have we had? COVID. We've had economic downturn, supply shortages. We've had inflation. We've had all these things. We have a war in Europe. All these things are happening, right? And so change is coming a lot more frequently, and we're asking our teams to be changing a lot more frequently. So I think you're onto something with this idea that it's not just the old school way of doing change, which is a project that has a beginning and an end. This is like almost a continuous cycle now, and I'm seeing, and that's kind of interesting to me. It's almost, I've been looking at the idea of resiliency and how we build resiliency in change, where we can have teams that can deal with change. I'm an entrepreneur, so I've had to deal the last 10 years with constant change. And so how do I build a team that's resilient, that can handle change and still be able to continue forward? So that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
I think that's really, really good reflections. And I think it's, as you said, though, going back to these older models with the unfreeze, move, and refreeze. If you would go out and ask you and I would go out now in any organization and say, hey guys, do you feel a bit like you're in a frozen state right now? No organizations almost would say, yeah, everything is like super calm. Nothing has happened in the past years. And I think that has implications, again, then for how we lead. Not only do we need to prepare our organization for being in a more continuous change, where we can't wait for the next project, even if, of course, we have projects, but we can't wait for that to happen. It's not one project and then we're done. It's a lot of different initiatives, and that's where the entrepreneurial spirit, I think, comes in. But I also think that if you think about those older models, maybe I'm being a bit unfair now, but it's a little bit, when you read about it, like the main change trick is that if you're a top manager, you know where to go. And the trick for change management is, if you're going to be good, you're going to get your people to line up and just follow you.
Yes.
And I don't think that's going to do the trick anymore. It's not going to be those 8 people on top of the pyramid that knows everything, or they certainly not going to come up with the best ideas. We know that for sure. Very few of the most groundbreaking and innovative ideas comes from top management. Like very, very, very. Now someone is going to get upset when they hear that, maybe, but that's actually true. Most of those groundbreaking new things that really changes the world, or at least the organization, they come from the outskirts or periphery. Yeah. And they could be like scanning work somewhere from someone that's really into something. And I think the job for a leader is, of course, we need those who can be visionary and all of that. That's not, it's still true to have the purpose of something, super true, more true than ever, I'd say. But we also need them to create both structures and cultures that encourage ideas, creativity, and testing and pilots and mistakes even. And that is different.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Leadership skills are like any other skills. You need to practice them to get better at them. Best-selling leadership author John S. Rennie knows this. That's why he's written a new book called You Have the Watch. It's a guided journal for leaders designed to take you through an entire year of leadership training. By the end of the year, you will master 50 of the most important leadership skills. If you want to have a greater impact on the results and people in your organization, go to youhavethewatch.com and pick up your copy today.
This episode is brought to you by Ignite Management Services. Ignite is led by Mike Watson, who you might remember from episode 137. Mike and his team believe that everything starts with leadership, whether it's strategy execution or cultural transformation. It's the role of the leader to create the conditions for their people to succeed. The team at Ignite can help you develop critical habits to enhance your leadership capability and transform your business. Ignite Management is now offering the Resilient Leadership Assessment Tool. This is an online questionnaire designed to assess and guide leadership development, coaching, and team building. It provides leaders an opportunity to gain insights into their leadership strengths and development needs. After taking this assessment, you will receive a custom, detailed report that provides practical and actionable recommendations to enhance your effectiveness. I have taken this assessment myself and found it to be extremely valuable in helping me make changes to my leadership approach. Right now, Ignite is offering 15% off the price of this tool to the deep leadership audience. Go to ignitemanagement.ca and enter the code START15 at checkout to get started today. This episode is brought to you by Jeremy Clevenger at Liberty Strength. As a high-performing leader, you know that leadership isn't about telling people what to do, it's about leading by example. And for most people, the one area that they are lacking when it comes to leading by example is their health and fitness. By improving your health and fitness, every other area of your life improves. Your energy skyrockets, your sleep improves, your confidence increases, and more. But how can you get and stay fit as a busy leader? Well, you do what you've always done. You hire the best people for the job. Don't struggle on your own. Put Liberty Strength in your corner. Jeremy and his team will work with you to take your physique, mindset, nutritional habits, and more to the next level with his step-by-step, all-inclusive coaching program. I've worked with Liberty Strength for the past 2 years, and I'm in the best shape of my life, and I'm still hitting strength personal records at 56 years old. If you want to step up your game, reach out to Jeremy at libertystrengthtx.com to find out more and get your initial consultation scheduled with him today.
I love that you bring up mistakes. We've talked about this a lot on this show and the idea of the power in learning through mistakes. And you know, as an entrepreneur, I can tell you I've made a lot of mistakes in this business. And I have a corner of my factory where we made some product mistakes that didn't really sell too well. And so, but you know what we learned? Every time we made a mistake, it was a new iteration to our thought process and the ideas of what's going to win in this market. So I don't consider those as mistakes. I consider them as that's the cost of learning, that we learned a lot and we accelerated our learning by actually putting something into the market that failed. We're like, okay, well, that didn't work. So what can we do now? I think failure is an interesting subject. So I did 22 years in corporate, and working for 3 global companies, and mistakes were not tolerated. We were not allowed to make mistakes. Everything had to be perfect. And the thing is, I think that's where the learning occurs. That's where the iterative growth occurs when you have mistakes. And I think you have to have a culture that at least allows for some sort of experimental learning. That's why I like the idea you're talking about, bringing an entrepreneurship inside of these companies to allow those kind of decisions to be made that are quick, that are iterative, that may fail, but it's not the end of someone's career when they make a mistake. I think that's something that you're on to something, I think, there.
I think that is very, very well put. And I think that also brings me to another topic, which is not another topic, but has another name at least, that I'm super interested in. And it's, in research language, it's called the ambidexterity problem.
Yeah. I'm writing it down.
Using both hands would be an easier way to put that. But in this context, it usually means at least that you need to, as an organization and then as a leader, you need to allow for the organization to both be super efficient in today's business. And then the demands are pretty high. You probably need processes, and you need all those state gates and routines, and you need to do things the same way as you did before. You can't invent everything every day. Yeah. That's the one hand. But on the other hand, you also need to be creating room for this entrepreneurship, what you said, the mistakes, the iterations, the innovations, the creativity. And the tricky part is that it's completely different systems that would be super good for the what usually called exploitation than being good at today's model, and exploration. So as a leader, that's also a challenge that many, when I talk to organizations, if I go out again and taking Volvo Group as an example, they wouldn't call it the ambidexterity problem because they don't know what that is. But they say we need to be good at both performing and transforming. Another organization I work with, they say we need to be good at both aligning and adapting. And it's basically the same thing. And the tricky thing is that it's hard to do that at the same time. Yeah. So that is something. It's a huge topic in research. I could speak about this for like a week, but it's a huge topic because it needs different kind of leadership. It needs different organizational structure potentially, and what you say about the different sort of culture where we need to encourage mistakes and encourage learning and encourage iteration and trust, and potentially those kinds of things will be the most important leading values. Whereas with the other hand, we need to have. We can't tolerate mistakes all the time, right? If we have these processes that need to run, we need to sort of have a structure that works for us. So these are tricky questions that I love.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's tricky so that we don't have the perfect solution, but we are working on it.
I think it's a really important question to have. I have a friend of mine who's he's high up in Amazon. And so we were going on a trip together. We were talking about this. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a small factory. I know all my employees' birthdays. I know their families. Very entrepreneurial. We're mistake driven. We're exploring, if you will. We're transforming, not necessarily performing, but we're learning, right? And so he said to me, when I build an Amazon warehouse, I need to hire 5,000 people on day one when the business opens. And they all have to be doing it the Amazon way. We have ways that we've studied around the world that are best practices, and we need our employees doing what we've learned to be best practices. And to me, that was like sort of a wake-up call with this. Like, I believe in being more entrepreneurial, but like you said, that warehouse has to open and it has to run with 5,000 people, not necessarily making mistakes and learning from the mistakes, but implementing best practices they've learned throughout the world. So there's where it's to me, was like a wake-up call with, okay, maybe the idea of, just learning and discovering and having fun doesn't work when you have 5,000 people you're hiring and have to run on day one. So I think you're right. These are tough questions and fun to think about, for sure.
It's fun to think about, and it's fun also because it's sort of there's tons of literature. I can give you some tips, but some of the researchers, they really advocate it's too hard. We need to separate. It's not going to be possible. But that comes with some downsides, right? Because if you separate it, and then the people who are very, very explorative and innovative, they come up with brilliant ideas. But it's not going to be easy to have the other 5,000 adopt those and make them theirs. And so it comes with a lot of downsides. But then on the other hand, if everyone, all the 5,000 or 50,000 is going to be both, that also comes with problems. It's going to be easier to integrate the new ideas, but it's a risk that the new idea is going to sort of be drowning among all these processes and the demand for performance, basically.
Yeah.
So it's tricky, really tricky solve. And another layer on that is that when it's tough, management tends to focus on only on the performance side or the exploitative side, which is completely understandable. But then what happens in 2 years when you're sort of lagging behind and you haven't worked? It's a very interesting topic, I think. And I think many organizations struggle with it.
Yeah, that's it's such an interesting topic. It wasn't what we're going to talk about today, but I love it because it's so interesting to me because I do see the problem on both sides. Well, the question I was going to ask you is, as you've gone through your research, and I like the fact that you said that you do action research, which is, in other words, you're embedded, you're actually watching it, and then you're seeing the results. As you've done those projects over the years, have you been surprised by results, like with, either surprised that your hypothesis was right or surprised that your hypothesis was completely wrong? Or I'm just curious to just, asking a researcher what it's like when you discover a surprise or something sort of interesting that you didn't expect.
Well, it's a really great question. And I think that, well, it sounds really banal, but one of the greatest surprises so far, I think, was that we did, you remember the students I talked about, the corporate entrepreneurship master program. So we send them out two and two in teams in then 10 different companies, and they collect data. And we've done this now for 10 years. So we have plenty of data, and we supervise them. So we also have data from her. So I went through all that data together with my colleague, also Tobias Fredberg, who you know a bit. And our research question was, what seemed to help these initiatives not only thrive, this entrepreneurial work, not only that they succeed, but what seemed to be the mechanism for them to actually also change the organization, to be a part of driving the organizational change, so that this initiative actually influenced the organizational path in some way. And I was expecting, again, something I'm at a technical university, that there was a really cool technological advances that sort of was so big that everyone had to adapt to this new idea. I was expecting something tangible, but it was actually quite easy to see. And I'm sure you are not going to be surprised, but the most important thing that came back over and over again over these 10 years, what seemed to make it work, was a shared purpose. And not only a shared purpose, of course, not only something that was on paper, but these students, they came back over and over again and said, so we constantly talked about this purpose. We discussed it, and we said, all right, so this thing that we are doing, which seemed to be at odds with what everyone else was doing, it could have created a lot of tension. It seemed to not do that, because we were constantly discussing how are we a part of fulfilling our core purpose, and not the purpose of making money, something bigger, something stronger, something more powerful. So that was the one that came back. And the next one is going to be even more simple. That was as one student said, the obscene amount of time that they spent building relationships.
Yeah.
So it was the trust and the purpose. And again, I made the mistake and think that it would be something, analytical or tangible or technological or something like that. But the two major things was purely relational: trust, purpose, building relations. And that was, I think it's kind of nice to have the data on it, because maybe someone like you worked for a long time as a leader, you could sense that. But if you have the data for it, it's easier to sort of motivate for other leaders when I'm advising. But hey, I think you really need to try to build this culture and the trust, and not only focusing on the numbers or on the structures or on the technological advancements. So that was one thing that surprised me, actually.
Well, and I think that's consistent with what we're seeing now with, and probably, I hate to say the word younger employees or younger workforce, but they do want to see that the organization, A, has a purpose that's not just making money, and B, that they're consistent with that purpose right? And we've seen it play out with a lot of employee protests where they feel like the organization's not living up to their stated purpose, right? So we'll see activism within employees, which we've never seen before, which is interesting. So I think, as far as a leader is concerned, every time I've run an organization, it's always to build and communicate a purpose that we're all doing together, and then also to build those relationships, which creates trust in the organization. So intuitively, it makes sense to me. But like you said, when you have the data to back it up, then you've got a lot more that you can work with in terms of convincing people why. Especially, I would say this, maybe older school managers who said, "Well, no, I've never had to do that in the past. It's always been about if we take care of the shareholders, everything else works out." But it's not really the case nowadays. I think you're onto something with this respect to the idea of purpose. I think it's much more important now for younger employees that there is a purpose, that they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, and that they believe in that purpose. And then there's consistency between what the company says and what they actually do. And that when that breaks down, I think that's when people get in trouble, or companies get in trouble with not living up to their purpose. I think that's a problem. Yeah.
And I also think this is not my field, but I'm very interested in the neuroscience and that kind of sphere. And there's plenty of research from that field actually showing by, looking at the brains of people, that purpose is one of the strongest motivators for not only that it's fun, but also to produce results. So if you really feel about the purpose, that is something meaningful, it's not only to make the workplace, nicer and more fun, it's also actually create higher performance. And it is a brilliant book by a guy called Dan Cable that shows this in a really neat way, and easy to read, but it is a fantastic researcher at London School of Economics. I think it's called Alive at Work. It's really great.
Okay, we'll look that up and put a link in the show notes for that too. Live at Work. I'll look that up, put that in there. So great resource there. With respect to the findings you've had on trust and purpose, have you written anything yet on that subject? I'm just curious so we all could read it.
Yes, around that one, we have a book chapter in a book series called Research and Organizational Change and Development. And the book chapter is called When the Seed Changes the Soil. Seed then being the entrepreneurial initiative, and changing the organizational system that would then be the soil. So that is respect for that. And then I also, inspired by that, I started a research project that I know we discussed a little bit, which is an open source article called in the Learning Organization, Renewing Models for Change is that paper called. That was actually inspired of those thoughts, but I did a lot of work with leaders and tried to figure out how a new model for change could look, and with much more stronger emphasis on trust and purpose, actually.
Okay. Well, we're going to put links in the show notes for those. I did see that chapter, When the Seed Changes the Soil, when I was doing a little research before this. I saw that one. So, yeah, so that's good. What was the last paper you mentioned? I didn't get
the last paper I mentioned was, it's called Renewing Models for Change. And that's easy to Google. So it's in the Learning Organization is the journal.
Okay.
And I actually got some critical voices on that one first, because it was too adapted for practitioners, and I refused to change it. So if it's any practitioners out there, I wrote it for you guys.
Well, there's mostly practitioners out there, so we're definitely going to put a link in the show notes for that. So the Renewing Models for Change, we'll put that in there. So, well, this has been great. Is there anything, final words you want to share with our viewing audience that might be interesting, talk about?
Well, I think that it's when what we talked about a little bit also before, when we live in terrible times in some respects, with the war, we just came out of COVID, we have a different sort of crisis here and there. And what we see in various sort of global surveys is that less people trust in government to do something about it, and more people trust in leaders and organizations to step up and do good stuff, be good companies. And do that, we need to be change leaders, I think. So I think we really, all of you guys, have an important job to do, to lead good change in a good way. And it's tricky, but I think it's super important in the times we're in right now.
Powerful message. I couldn't agree with that one more. So how can our listeners find out more about you and any of your research?
Well, luckily, my name is very unusual.
Yes.
So that's easy to find. I'm at Chalmers University, so it's easy to look me up there, or feel free to look me up at LinkedIn if you're using that. If you would like to connect, please mention that you heard me on this show, because then I promise I will be swift. And feel free to connect if you would like.
Absolutely. We'll put links in the show notes for those resources, and also for the papers in the book that we mentioned throughout the discussion. Johanna, this has been fascinating. Again, it's so exciting to meet you, to hear your words. I've read your words, but to meet you and hear what the research you're doing is very exciting for me. And I know that you're going to leave a lot for our listeners to think about. So thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was been great.
Thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.
If you're a working professional wondering what's next for your career, you've come to the right place. Whether you're looking for a promotion, growth, or a potential career transition, look no further. With over 30 years working in a variety of industries, I share my insider knowledge with those ready to get ahead on Career Advancement with Craig Ansell. Tune in to get your strategies for success.
Hey there, fabulous souls. I'm Stephanie Baklaan.
And I'm Eden Alpert.
And we're the hosts of the brand new podcast, Unapologetically Fab.
Get ready to join us on an amazing and real journey as we dive into life after 40 and own it.
We're all about changing the narrative, leaning into who you are, and living a life by your own design.
Join us as we embrace life unapologetically and redefine success.
This is Unapologetically Fab,
an Electric Cast production.
See you there.